Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. The Trump trifecta. The US House is called for the Republicans, giving the president-elect control across all three elected branches of government. Fed officials debate the path of US rates as inflation data keeps them on track for another cut. Asian equities slide with the dollar strengthening to its highest in 2 years. Plus, mega pension plan. Chancellor Rachel Reeves tells us she wants to reform UK pensions to unlock funds to boost economic growth. We will bring you our interview with the UK Chancellor. Happy Thursday, everyone. We're checking your earnings for you with Siemens up front and centre, seeing 2025 comparable revenue increasing 3 to 7%. The estimates had been for an increase of 4.6%, so at the top end of this new range, 2025 for Siemens, that is higher than the estimates in terms of its views on comparable revenue for 2025. We're listening out for any comments, of course, in terms of the impact of fiscal stimulus in China. The stock up around 8% year to date. We look for details around the digital industries business and the industrial division as well. The fourth quarter net income for Siemens coming in bang in line with the estimates, 1.9 billion euros, in line with the estimates. In terms of fourth quarter orders, slightly above the estimates. It's a beat in terms of fourth quarter orders for Siemens, coming in at 22.9 billion euros, just shy of 23 billion euros. The estimates had been for just short of 22.4 billion euros. Full year dividend per share, 5.2 euros, above the estimates of 4.9. So it looks like a beat coming through from Siemens. We're going to be speaking with the CEO of that conglomerate, 6:45 a.m. UK time. Stay tuned for that conversation. ASML is having an investor day. This stock, of course, under pressure after it lowered its 2025 guidance. Here's the important line coming through, though. ASML is keeping its 2030 sales outlook unchanged. It is keeping its sales outlook unchanged at 44 billion euros to 60 billion at the top end. That will be positive for investors. They are holding on to that 2030 sales outlook, despite the fact that, of course, earlier this year, a few weeks ago, of course, they lowered their 2025 guidance. The stock, again, ASML, down about 7% year to date. We're looking for any lines on the buyback. They have a 12 billion euro buyback program. But the top line coming through from ASML is that they are maintaining that 2030 outlook for sales with a top-end view of 60 billion euros for the maker of these extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, without which you cannot make the most sophisticated semiconductors in the world. We'll keep across that story for you, of course, throughout the day. Let's get to the markets more broadly then. We had the inflation data out of the US, CPI coming in broadly in line, bang in line, in fact, with the estimates, and market pricing then increasing around expectations that you will get that cut in December from the Federal Reserve. About an 80% chance of a cut. Another 25 basis points in December is the views from the markets. We'll see if that adjusts on the producer prices. Those cross later today. You're expected to see a marginal tick up in producer prices with a print of around 2.3% in October. That is the estimate year on year for producer prices. We're also going to be hearing from Jay Powell of the Federal Reserve, of course, as we hear from other officials over the last 24 hours or so, pointing to the uncertainty around the path ahead for this Fed. European futures currently pointing to modest gains, 0.2% after 2 days of losses for European stocks. FTSE 100 looking flat right now. Commodities under pressure. S&P futures pointing lower by 0.1% after essentially a flat session yesterday for US stocks. Looking for direction, it seems, after crossing above that 6,000 level. Nasdaq futures pointing lower by 0.2%. Let's flip the board and look cross-asset. You did see yields dropping around 5 basis points at the front end on the 2-year yesterday. Yields edging higher again today, 4.31 on the 2-year right now. The Japanese yen continues to be under pressure. Dollar strength at that 2-year high. The currency over in Japan down 0.3%. That's lifting Japanese equities on a session when broadly Asian stocks are under pressure. Bitcoin crossing above 90,000, continuing to punch through fresh records. and $100,000 is now in sight. Up 1.7% in the session today. Brent 71.84, down 0.6%. Let's get to the politics of the US, inevitably, and once again, because President-elect Donald Trump has achieved full control of the US government after Republicans held on to their narrow majority in the House. It comes after Trump returned to the White House for the first time since his chaotic exit 4 years ago. He met with President Joe Biden in the Oval Office, as you can see, where both leaders agreed to a peaceful transition of power. This did not happen, of course, back in 2020. Let's get more with Bloomberg opening trade anchor Kriti Gupta with the details. Kriti, what do we make of the clean sweep? Not a big surprise, but it does remind us of the power and leverage that Trump will have.
It's a really important moment for that clean sweep to happen because, again, continuity is something you're going to see even within Trump's cabinet picks, which we'll get to in a moment, but then across the government as well. And this is crucial because in January and going into early spring, you're going to have several moments where Congress has to talk about things like the deficit, trade agreements, not to mention certain domestic policies as well. A lot of that on the early congressional agenda. It makes it a lot easier to have all the Republicans on the same page.
Talk us about some of the new announcements as well. The names, the men and women being tapped, not confirmed yet, of course, but being tapped by Trump. And one name that jumps out is Matt Gaetz.
Yes, he's turning out to be a very controversial pick. This is a Florida congressman who has been previously accused of sex trafficking with a minor. So, of course, is also under investigation for the House Ethics Committee. About a year ago, it was told to him that he would not be charged for the alleged crimes there. But again, he does remain under the House Ethics Committee. So in terms of confirmations, even though you could potentially have a lot of support in Congress right now, this is the one cabinet pick that a lot of kind of people are raising their eyebrows on in D.C. Simply that even if he is a Republican, even though he is from Florida, he may not have the widespread support that some of the other candidates from Donald Trump's kind of cabinet may have.
Yeah, and he has consistently, of course, denied those allegations. And it seems now he is not part of the House. He stepped away from that as a result of being tapped up for this role. And so, at least for the moment, doesn't face that ethics scrutiny and, again, has denied those allegations. When it comes to Jack Smith and the role there, what do we know at this point? Who is Jack Smith? Remind our international viewers of the importance of this role.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jack Smith is a very important thorn in Donald Trump's side, I think is the best way to put it. He's a special prosecutor out of the DOJ. This is a really important case. He's been, of course, prosecuting Donald Trump for several cases, but he is actually looking to take a step back, according to the New York Times, finishing his work and potentially resigning before the president-elect takes office. Again, this is just a report from the New York Times, no actual commentary or statement from Jack Smith. But this was one of his kind of investigations and prosecutions, was one of the reasons that Donald Trump was at one point thought of as maybe not being eligible to run for president in the first place. This really opened up a big constitutional battle about what immunity actually looks like. It has now been cleared by the Supreme Court that if he is indeed in office as president, he can't necessarily be sued or prosecuted for his crime. So that question of immunity kind of undermines Jack Smith's initial case. So that's going to be something that we'll see if he does indeed resign.
OK, Kriti Gupta, thank you very much indeed. Opening trade anchor, of course, on these nominations, or at least individuals tapped to have significant roles within the incoming Trump administration. And, of course, the trifecta now, the House falling to the Republicans. So across those three branches of US government, the Trump team and the Republicans firmly ensconced, of course. Now, traders boosting bets on a December Fed cut. To the macroeconomics now, following a subdued US inflation report. The CPI, of course, coming in line with expectations. Neil Kashkari says he is confident that inflation is headed down towards the central bank's 2% target.
I'm not seeing a lot of upside risk yet. We don't know what's going to get enacted. I'm not seeing a lot of upside risk that inflation is going to take off from here. The bigger risk that I'd be concerned about on the inflation front is just if we're landing at around the 2.5% level instead of back down to 2% level. I think that those risks existed before the election. And I think that there continues to be uncertainty now. And we need to just take our time, let the data come to us, and let that guide us.
OK, let's bring in Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel, the market check on the inflation data. We look ahead to producer prices, of course, later today. Valerie, talk us through how the markets reacted then to a CPI print that came in line with estimates. What does it tell us about the trajectory of inflation in the US?
We did get that bang-in-line CPI print yesterday out of the US. Core CPI coming in at 0.3 as expected month-on-month and 3.3 as expected year-on-year. But if you look at the market reaction, Tom, it really took this as a dovish print. Let's flip the board and just talk about how two-year yields traded after this. Seems like we were really gunning for a hot print. We saw a steep rally in the two-year yield. It closed down 6 basis points on the day. We're now pricing in an 80% chance that we do get that Fed cut in December, up from shy of 50% just a few sessions ago. What seemed to not get the memo about this Treasury rally was the long end. I want to talk about that one more second on the 30-year yield. It attempted to rally, Tom, but then the bond vigilantes took over, and it ended up nearly 7 basis points higher on the day. The 230s curve itself saw the biggest steepening it's seen this year. It steepened 12 basis points. This came out at the same time we had the October budget deficit come higher than expected. We now have that Republican sweep in the Congress and the presidential and the presidency. This is perhaps the bond market saying, watch those spending plans, because I am keeping an eye on this growing fiscal deficit.
Well, I wonder if Jay Powell will be commenting on any of that later today. What do we expect to hear from the Fed chair?
He speaks at 8 p.m. later tonight, maybe a late one for us here in London. He will have a Q&A with the moderator, and market will be watching any hints on a change in language when it comes to the December cut. Notably, Tom, he is speaking after we get PPI later today, so he will have a good idea of where PCE comes for this month. I can bet you he's going to get some questions on Federal Reserve independence and what he thinks of the new administration that is going to be inaugurated on January the 20th. Keep an eye out for any new comments from him, pushing back on perhaps a Republican administration wanting to get more active in his interest rate decisions. OK,
Bloomberg's Friday Title. Thank you very much indeed. We will be tuning in, of course, for those comments from Jay Powell, listening into what he has to say about those issues. Let's bring in Ava Hong right now for a check on the Asian market. Standing by patiently in Singapore. Another down day for Asian stocks. The Nikkei as well in negative territory, despite starting off on the front foot. How's the Asian market shaping up, Ava?
Well, it looks bad today. I think it's that continued repricing of Trump's win, and with that trifecta, it's just cementing those bets. So we're seeing Asia stocks down, as you mentioned, but also hitting the currencies. Look at the way the yen is faring against the greenback levels we haven't seen since July 22nd. And it's interesting because we already have the likes of Bloomberg Intelligence talking to us about how this actually makes the case for the BOJ's rate hikes to go higher next year because of what this means for import inflation, the inflationary impulse. What is a bit different this time around, flip the board, compared to July's yen weakness, is that it is also coming against the backdrop of weakness with other Asian currencies as the greenback marches higher. So to some, this gives us some clues as to why Japanese authorities haven't been as active in verbal intervention, pushing back against the yen weakness. Look at how the Southeast Asian currencies have been really hard hit. Flip the board again and take a look at what we're seeing on the Chinese stocks, because obviously amid the macro weakness, remember tomorrow we also have some of these activity indicators out of China. Investors are unwilling to take risk. Even Tencent, which earlier showed that earnings beat, erasing the gains of almost 3% from earlier in the session. So we're seeing that backdrop, but Nikkei, as you say, has also turned tail. I think it's part of this risk off that we're seeing overall in the markets. Tom.
Yeah, the ripple effects of dollar strength at those 2-year highs. Ava Hong in Singapore. Thank you very much indeed. Now, coming up, President-elect Donald Trump picking Matt Gaetz as his Attorney General. He will have to be confirmed, of course, but it is a signal of what is to come. We're going to have more reaction on Trump's controversial appointments next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, Republicans have retained the U.S. House, giving Donald Trump's party full control of the government. Former U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy welcomed some of the key nominations, with the exception, interestingly, of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. McCarthy spoke to us at the Barclays Asia Forum.
For those world leaders, they have a relationship with President Trump, and I think they're probably thankful that President Trump won. It brings greater stability around the world, but it also sends a very clear message that America won't be pushed around. And also when it comes to economic issues like trade and others, this president wants to negotiate.
OK, for analysis, I'm joined now by Josephine Harmon, Assistant Professor in Political Science at Northeastern University. Mike McCarthy as well, also saying that he thinks that Gates would not be an appropriate individual for that role. We'll see if he gets through, of course, the process that goes through once they've been tapped. Let's talk about the fact that this Republican Party now has control of the House, the Senate and the presidency. Can we assume that the key policies at the top of the agenda for President Trump will now sail through Congress?
I think that's very likely. I mean, certainly his cabinet picks, while seen as controversial by the Democrats, are not going to see that much opposition in terms of being confirmed by the Senate, because that's now controlled by the Republicans. So that's going to sail through probably largely unaffected. When it comes to Trump's first 100 days, his priorities are going to be about immigration and the border. That's going to get a lot of support from all corners of the Republican Party in the House and the Senate. So I think the key things, he'll be able to hit the ground running. And as you say, controlling all three. He's got the House, he's got the Senate, he's got the presidency, he's even got the courts because of his first term. So pretty much he dominates across the board. And that broad immunity as well that the Supreme Court issued earlier this year. The first 100 days, what do they look like then? I think they involve, well, first of all, some very loud, sort of punchy policies around trying to fix the border, trying to get some change on immigration. There's been speculation about pardoning the January 6th rioters, people involved in that. That's been a sort of pretty big part of his platform when he was campaigning. So I think those things are going to take priority in the first 100 days.
Are there policies within the Trump administration, or at least parts of the policy agenda, that are going to face a little bit more friction? Or is it all plain sailing now in terms of some of those key policies? Are there areas where the Senate, the House may prove problematic still for Trump?
I think, what Trump now is facing, because he's made these inroads into these new voter areas, he got a lot of support from Latino men, from young men. I think he might face some pushback when it comes from parts of the House, when it comes to things like a welfare reform. That might now be a wedge issue within the various corners of the Republican Party in Congress. So I think, stuff like, immigration, tax cuts, that's going to get broad support across the party in Congress. So what
do you read from some of these nominations, or at least some of these individuals, again, being picked by Trump? They has to go through the confirmation process. But we have Marco Rubio at one end, who's seen as a little bit more consensus. And then you have controversial, to say the least, Matt Gaetz on the other end when it comes to Attorney General and the Defence Secretary as well. What does that signal?
Well, I think what we're seeing now is the Trump show. This is what his second term is going to be. There aren't going to be those Washington insiders like Rex Tillerson who were pushing back on Trump's agenda in his first term. He is selecting people who will be loyal to him, who will push through his agenda, and I think he will see, or at least Republicans are quite confident, this will be a much smoother term for him in that respect. So, Marco Rubio is interesting. There are a couple of old faces, Ratcliffe, the CIA director, but most of these people are new. They're Trump loyalists. Marco Rubio has been brought into the fold after he initially was, fairly anti-Trump in the Republican primaries back in 2015, 2016. I'm not sure that there'll be that much internal debate on the issues. I think this will be about following Trump's agenda, marching to his drum, and in that sense, he'll be incredibly dominant.
And that includes from the Senate, because John Thune now going to be leading the Senate. Elon Musk, playing that role, has suggested he wanted Rick Scott. It is not Rick Scott, who is a Trump loyalist. It's John Thune, who, of course, has that credibility, been there for about 20 years. Is John Thune potentially a thorn in the side?
Potentially. I think it depends on how much he's able to mobilise a sense of resistance within the party. So we'll have to see on that. That's one to watch for. OK. When it comes to the Democrats, then, how do they pick up the pieces? And they're looking at the 2 years down the line, we're going to have the midterms. Yeah. What is the strategy for the Democratic Party now? I don't think even they know. This is going to be a very lengthy post-mortem. I think they're going to have to really go back to the drawing board and have a real rethink about how they are trying to, counterweight Trump. The party since Hillary Clinton in 2016 ran for the presidency, it's been about an anti-Trump platform, That does not resonate with voters, apparently. You know, Biden was uniquely successful in 2020. There was very high turnout, around 66% turnout overall, which was record turnout in the 2020 elections. We've seen depressed turnout this time. So, you know, what they were running on, abortion as a mobilizing message, democracy, these have not turned out to be the silver bullets that they thought they were. So they're going to have to really rethink their strategy. For sure.
Josephine Harmon, thank you very much indeed on another very busy day when it comes to US politics, of course. Assistant Professor in Political Science at Northeastern University. We have some lines crossing. Let's get back to the earnings story right now. We're pivoting from politics to the earnings story. Hon Hai, of course, the manufacturer largely of iPhones and iPads, but also that AI infrastructure play as well, coming in with net income in the first 9 months of close to 106.4 billion Taiwanese dollars. Operating profit, 136 billion Taiwanese profit. Revenue in the first 9 months coming in at 4.7 trillion Taiwanese dollars. So those are some of the key lines. Earnings per share, 7.67. The redhead now crossing Hon Hai. 9 months, in the first 9 months of the year, their net income of 106 billion Taiwanese dollars. Again, this is the contract manufacturer, largely for the iPhone, the iPad, and some of the AI infrastructure. The stock is up about 100% year to date. We're waiting for any lines in terms of what they're telling us about orders for servers for some of those AI applications as well. The company did recently book its slowest monthly sales growth since February. Also, any lines on what ruptured trade lines will mean for this company. Net income in the third quarter coming in and as a beat, 49 billion Taiwanese dollars above the estimates of 45. So it's a beat in the third quarter for Hon Hai. It's also a miss, by the way, when it comes to operating profit. A beat in net income in the third quarter, but a miss on operating profit of 54 billion Taiwanese dollars. Coming up ahead of UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves' first Mansion House speech, we get details on how she's planning to reform pensions. We have been speaking to the UK Chancellor. That interview is coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
If he pulls out of the Paris Agreement, another 195, 96 countries are going to continue to be in the agreement. And what he will do is cede, if he did that, he would cede leadership to China, the very thing that he says we don't want to do. And he would diminish the ability of the world to be able to respond to this existential crisis.
Former US Secretary of State John Kerry speaking with Bloomberg's Haslinda Amin on the sidelines of the Barclays Asia Forum in Singapore. Now, some other stories making the news this Thursday. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen faces being barred from the next presidential election after prosecutors in an embezzlement trial asked for a 5-year ban on public office. Le Pen and members of her national rally are accused of diverting millions of euros in EU funds to build her party's platform in France. The National Rally leader denies the allegations. Emmanuel Macron has called on the EU to delay Basel banking rules if the US does too. The French president says the European Union should synchronise its financial regulation and not move faster than competitors. Countries across the world were due to implement tougher capital requirements simultaneously, but the US and some others have since chosen their own timeframes. The US says Chinese state-sponsored hackers have perpetrated a, quote, broad and significant cyber-espionage campaign. Officials say multiple telecoms companies were infiltrated to steal customer call records and compromise communications. The New York Times has reported that the targets included Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and members of Kamala Harris's campaign staff. Coming up, ASML's bullish bet. The world's biggest maker of advanced chip-making machines reaffirms its demand outlook on AI strength. We have the details next. That is coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. The Trump trifecta. The US House is called for the Republicans, giving the president-elect control across all three elected branches of government. Fed officials, meanwhile, debate the path of US rates as inflation data keeps them on track for another cut. Asian equities slide with the dollar strengthening to its highest in 2 years. Plus, ASML reaffirms its bullish long-term revenue outlook as the world's biggest maker of advanced chip-making machines bets on an AI-driven boom in demand. Let's check in on these markets then. European futures pointing higher after 2 days of losses. We'll see to what extent ASML and the other earnings stories play into that. So modest gains being flagged by European futures, up 0.1%. You were flat essentially across the US equity market yesterday, seemingly looking for the next catalyst. Will that come with producer prices later today? Consumer prices coming in bang in line with the estimates. UK FTSE 100 futures currently flat. S&P E-minis looking down by about 0.1%, so some modest losses, still above that 6,000 level. Nasdaq futures looking to lose about 44 points so far as things stand. Let's flip the board and look cross-asset. You had yields down 5 basis points at the front end on the back of an inflation print, again, that came in line, and markets and traders started to ramp up again. Bets around a December cut from the Federal Reserve. Now about an 80% chance of that, again, according to the pricing coming through from these markets. 4.30 right now on the 2-year at the front end. Yields actually up in the session by 2 basis points. 155 on the yen. Yes, you are still at those 2-year highs for the dollar, and that is proving problematic for Asian currencies and Asian stocks as well. The Japanese yen currently down 0.3%. Bitcoin, it did cross above 90,000, currently at 89,1990, up 1.5% so far in the session, but 100,000 doesn't look unachievable now, does it, for Bitcoin? 71.92 currently on Brent, down 0.5%. Now, the world's biggest makers of advanced chip-making machines, or the biggest maker of advanced chip-making machines, you're talking about extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, reaffirmed its demand outlook on AI strength. ASML also says global chip sales will exceed $1 trillion by the end of this decade. Let's get the details then from Bloomberg's Sarah Jacob, who's been poring over the numbers and the details from ASML that came through just about 30 minutes or so ago. Sarah, ASML then reaffirming its 2030 sales outlook. We know you'd flagged this to us. That was going to be key. Give us the details.
Good morning. Yes, ASML will be holding its investor day today, and ahead of that, they confirmed the forecast for revenue of between 44 billion and 60 billion in 2030. The company's talked about leveraging the artificial intelligence opportunity, which it says will allow it to deliver significant revenue and profitability growth. ASML says AI is the next big driver of productivity and innovation across society. The company also said it expects to return significant amounts of cash to shareholders through a combination of both share buybacks and growing dividends.
What does it say then about the long-term strategy for ASML? We got that surprise, of course. Many in the markets were caught off their settings, essentially, when they cut their outlook, ASML, for 2025, and you saw that massive drop in the share price earlier this year. Talk us through the longer-term strategy and what we've learned about ASML's prospects then.
Yes, like you mentioned in the third quarter, the order intake missed estimates, surprising, the market. It cut its outlook for next year. It basically said that 2025 would be, the recovery would be more gradual than expected. That sparked a sell-off in its own shares as well as other chip-related stocks. But what we're seeing now is this sort of shows that the outlook for next year is more of a short-term blip. ASML is still very bullish about the long-term opportunity in its market. AI is certainly the big driver of this. It's even saying that it expects the annual semiconductor market growth to be at a rate of about 9% in the period between 2025 and 2030. So going down towards this 2030, it certainly looks very promising for ASML.
OK, Bloomberg's Sarah Jacob, maybe on some changing and more positive fortunes for ASML, a stock we will be watching at the open. Sarah, thank you very much indeed. The details are really essential company, of course, at the heart of the semiconductor industry and sector. Back to the earnings story right now with details crossing from the shipping company, Hapag-Lloyd. They are seeing now full-year EBITDA of between 4.2 billion to 4.6 billion at the top end of the range in euros, slightly above the estimate estimates of just shy of $4.2 billion. So a slightly brighter prospects, it seems, for that shipping company. Any lines, of course, on trade, tariffs will be interesting, but those are the top lines crossing from that shipping company, Hapag-Lloyd. We're going to speak to the CEO of that company, 7:30 a.m. London time. Now to the UK, where Rachel Reeves says the UK will legislate to pull £1.3 trillion of pension savings into a series of, quote, megafunds to boost private investment and economic growth. The Chancellor of the Exchequer spoke to Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden ahead of her Mansion House address tonight.
I think it'd be wrong to speculate what an incoming US administration would do. But we benefit, and so does the United States, from trade worth more than £300 billion a year. That trade is growing, and it's important for the prosperity of both the United Kingdom and the United States. And we'll continue to make representations for free and open trade that benefits both of our nations.
OK, let's turn to your Mansion House speech. When it comes to harnessing pension money to boost growth, what are you going to offer in terms of reform that your Conservative predecessors didn't?
What we don't have in the UK is mega pension funds. We don't have those economies of scale in our pension funds, which is why the interim report that we're publishing looks at having a minimum size of 25 or 50 billion pounds, similar to what you have in Canada and the United States. Those sorts of mega funds will have the expertise to make those investments, both in start-up and scale-up businesses and in British infrastructure.
What's different to what Jeremy Hunt did, because he just finished this consultation into consolidating the local government pension scheme. It made these exact points. Do you really need another consultation?
Well, the difference between what we're doing and what the previous government did is that we're going to legislate. And the previous government didn't have a pensions bill for around 5 years. We have a slot in the King's Speech for a pensions bill in this session of Parliament. We'll be introducing legislation in the spring so that we don't just talk about consolidation in the pension industry. Anyone can do that, but we actually make sure that it happens. That's the difference between this government and the previous government. We're getting on and doing the job.
OK, UK Chancellor, of course, Rachel Reeves, speaking to our UK correspondent Lizzie Burden. Lizzie, start off. Explain the outfit. You were wearing white lab suit. Where were you?
We were at a lab, a biotech lab in West London, which is funded by Pension Capital, so very on-brand, Quell Therapeutics.
How significant is this, really, this announcement?
Well, the idea is to pool pension capital so that you can get to pass that critical mass. If you look at Australia or Canada, they say it has to be 25 to 50 billion pounds, and then you can drive economic growth and also benefit those savers. That's the idea here, and indeed it's got support from the IPPR think tank saying that this is going to lift the UK off the bottom of the ladder of G7 investment.
She's not going to compel pension funds to invest in UK assets, something that's been debated, something that's proven a little controversial. Has she completely ruled that out, and if so, why?
Well, there are two issues here. First of all, as you suggest, you've got to get this money into UK companies. What are you going to do about that? Will you give them tax breaks? Will you mandate it? She's not saying that she's going to do that. The other problem is, how are you going to get money into the pension pot in the first place when you've got businesses really stretched by this budget, the tax hikes, the national insurance contributions going up, minimum wage going up. It looks like interest rates are going to be higher for longer. She didn't really have an answer to those questions. So you have to ask, apart from actually making legislation here, how is this going to be different from the Conservatives?
This interview taking place ahead of the Mansion House speech, the first one now for Rachel Reeves as Chancellor. What are we expecting to hear? What else are we expecting to hear in this speech? How consequential is this for a Chancellor who, of course, has faced some pushback, given a pretty momentous budget at the end of October?
Yeah, it's been quite uphill. She is going to make her first big pitch to the city here at this address, and she needs to give a plan for how the financial services sector in particular can feed into her growth vision. So apart from the pensions reforms, we're expecting her to cut red tape, some announcements on the regulators as well. She's going to tighten her grip on them. Interesting to see how far she'll go, because Keir Starmer at the Investment Summit, you'll remember, said he'd march through the regulators. So do we actually see a revival of the call-in powers? That's something that had been debated. Do we see the government making the regulators use competitiveness as a primary objective. We'll be listening out for both of those things. The other thing, as you heard there, was Rachel Reeves talking about the importance of free trade. Labour really under pressure to preempt Donald Trump's protectionism, but she did stop short there of ruling out retaliatory tariffs. I do think, though, free trade will be a big theme of this speech.
OK, Lizzie Burden, thank you very much indeed. Our UK correspondent, of course, speaking to the UK Chancellor ahead of that Mansion House speech later this evening. For the Chancellor, Lizzie, thank you. To German politics now, then. German Conservative leader Friedrich Merz has launched his election bid with a stinging attack on Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The CSU leader called the incumbent CDU leader called the incumbent a lightweight and accused him of being responsible for polarisation in the country. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Oliver Crook in Berlin, who knows all the acronyms by heart, of course. Ollie, what are we seeing then from the campaigning in Germany?
Yeah, so listen, for the SPD, for the first acronym, the incumbent Olaf Scholz really taking his opportunity there in the parliament to really talk about what he wants to care about and what he really thinks that Germany should put into focus. What he is basically saying, Tom, is that this should never be a trade-off in Germany. There should never be a trade-off between investing in security and investing in jobs, investing in companies and investing in infrastructure, and investing in security for the country and securing pensions. These should never be trade-offs. That is really what is the big distinction between Olaf Scholz and Friedrich Merz, who is much more willing to cut parts of the sort of social welfare state. The other point that Olaf Scholz made, and is really one of the points that he's trying to run on, is that he has been a non-escalator in the war with Ukraine and Russia. He has forbidden the sort of delivery of the long-range missiles. He thinks that this is going to be a winning argument among the German population. Friedrich Merz, for his part, took a slightly different tack. Have a listen to him.
You are dividing the country. Mr. Chancellor, you are the one responsible for this controversy and for this division in Germany. This is simply no way to govern a country.
And Friedrich Merz saying that basically he will not be supporting a lot of legislation, so we're going to get a bit of paralysis as far as actually more things getting done by government over the next couple of months in what could be really another few lost months in a sort of economy that desperately needs some action.
Well, from that action, they need to release the brake, would be the argue for some. The debt brake, that seems to be at the heart of this, Ollie.
100%. That is why the government collapsed. Scholz has been talking about reforming the debt brake for some time. Robert Habeck, the economy minister, likens it to boxing with your hands tied behind your back, not just because of the difficulty within the German economy, but also because other countries debt finance all of their issues all the time, and that Germany is in a very strong fiscal position. The problem you've got is this right here, the German Constitution, Article 115 right here. It's in the Constitution that you can't borrow over 0.35% of GDP. But we have got from Friedrich Merz yesterday beginning to talk about the ability to change the debt brake and really maybe the openness to do it. We had him say yesterday that, of course, it can be reformed. The question is why and for what purpose? Tom, I'll leave you with this. Is there not a sort of irony that we had a sort of left-leaning socialist government run by Olaf Scholz that fell apart over the debt brake, only to potentially elect a right-leaning conservative government that may reform it?
We love the irony. I love the Constitution. It's much smaller than I expected, Ollie. It's tiny, but maybe compact.
Well, I never leave home without it.
I would expect not, Ollie. Oliver Crook in Berlin, thank you very much indeed on how this campaign is shaping up, of course, in Germany as you head towards those elections in February of next year. Let's recap a major German corporate then, Siemens, of course, with the threads globally when it comes to this industrial company. And a positive set of numbers, at least on the top line for Siemens, seeing 2025 comparable revenue increasing between 3% and 7% at the top end. The estimates had been that 2025 comparable revenue would come in of an increase of 4.6%. So at the top end of that range from Siemens, that is significantly higher than the estimates. In the fourth quarter, net income came in line with the estimates at 1.9 billion euros. In terms of orders in the fourth quarter, those were also a beat for Siemens, 22.9 billion euros. The estimates had to be for 22.38 billion euros. Now, Bloomberg's Oliver Crook caught up with the CEO, Roland Busch, of Siemens, of course, and talked to him about the number of issues, of course, facing this company. Really interesting in terms of the exposure to China as well, and whether the CEO sees an impact of some of that fiscal stimulus that's been put into the system by Chinese officials. Take a listen to the Siemens CEO.
Our revenue from the United States contributes to something like 24%. From China, it's more on the 13% level. However, if you take the global industrial GDP, 30% comes from China. So there's no way around, if it comes to industrial markets, that we have to look into China. We have a very strong footprint there. We have a very strong position there. So therefore, it is of utmost importance for us also that the Chinese market is picking up. We do know that the government is looking very much into high-tech manufacturing. So once this market is getting more momentum, they want to invest, obviously, in automation and digitalization. So we are there. We are there to really pick up the momentum. Still, what holds this market back is, number one, of course, the contraction in the real estate sector. This was now addressed by the government because a lot of that sits on debt in provinces. Now they address it. They want to get a refreshing of this market, which is very good. And the other one is that the private consumption is not really picking up. We have extremely high savings rates. This reflects the confidence of the people in the future. If that starts moving, then we will see the market picking up quickly.
And we have our own sort of political crisis here in Germany, which obviously has been sort of dominating the attention within not just sort of the political space, but of course also for industry. What do you need to see from this next government in order to bring back this economy? What sort of policies? If there was Chancellor Roland Busch, what would be your number one course of action to bring the economy back?
So, okay. I think there's a lot of homework to do. Well, number one is, I do believe we need investment in infrastructure. Our mobility infrastructure is outdated, so we need to invest there. We have to manage our energy transition quickly because we cannot afford these high energy prices going forward. That would be the second point. The investment in the grid, for example, transmission grid, distribution grid, will be part in the future of a very high cost. So I would kind of rethink about how much expansion do we really need in order to carry forward. But we need to really reduce our energy prices going forward. The next one is investment also in our schooling system and in our education system. This is our future because Germany lives from innovation. That's where our strength is. The next one would be definitely immigration. We do need a good immigration. We need to bring people into work. And if it comes to budget, what I would do the same what I would do with the companies. Number one, yes, we have to invest. But at the same time, we have to look where you can save money because that's not for free. So therefore, the balance of looking on where can we spend less and where we have to invest, that's something what we have to do. And finally, I do believe it's very important to bring people into work.
And just on that point, you were talking about as running a company, companies take on debt. Do you think it's time for the German government to think about taking on debt and maybe looking at reforming the debt brake?
The way how you finance it, whether you increase your debt, whether you leverage private money to come into that market, that's an answer the government has to give. I do believe, though, that there's no way around. There's no way around but to invest. I didn't talk about the defense investment needed. So there's a lot of things we need to do. But again, at the same time, we do have a high inflow from tax. And we have to spend our money wisely. Because at the end of the day, if we do pay people for not working, that's not a good idea either. So therefore, I think it's a package which you have to do. There has to be a movement there in order to go forward. Because we do need growth. If you think about 0.5% or percentage more growth, which we need in Germany, that would solve the budget problem easily because of the tax inflow.
Okay, the CEO of Siemens, Roland Busch, speaking to Oliver Crook. There's plenty more coming up. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Now, Bloomberg has learned that Banco BPM will likely be among the buyers of a stake in rival Monte dei Paschi that's being sold by Italy's government. The Italian state said yesterday it's selling a 7% holding in the lender, the latest step in an exhaustive restructuring drive that dates back to 2017. There is a lot more coming up. We're going to preview Disney earnings and just break down what is happening in Bitcoin. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. We have producer prices out of the US later today, but let's reflect on what happened with consumer prices yesterday. Broadly, of course, top line is they matched the estimates. But for those looking for inflation concerns, lift the hood, and on a 3-month basis, annualized, you're actually looking at a print at the highest level since April out of the US, 3.6%. And that is a reminder of the complexities of the next steps for the Federal Reserve. And we heard from officials talking about their lack of certainty. Jay Powell's going to be speaking later today. The uncertainty is there. Will Jay Powell give any clarity? Markets are now increasing and have increased those bets that you will get another cut in December. The odds now around 80%. The last time I checked. But again, the projected forward look on inflation does look a little murkier from here. Let's flip the board and have a look at Bitcoin then. Ties into what's happening with yields as well. But for the moment, it is all about expectations around Trump. It crossed above $90,000. Do you remember $100,000 target? Used to be laughed off, didn't it, by some? Now it doesn't look that far away. The question is, to what extent and how much is priced in? We have another board, I think, on Bitcoin that can illustrate the overbought nature of this cryptocurrency right now. Let's flip the board and have a look. It is at those kind of levels you saw back in February. The SEC confirmed and gave the green light to some of those spot ETFs. You can find that on the terminal. So how much is priced in, and to what extent will Bitcoin actually be a priority for President Trump, at least in the near to medium term, is a question for those who are reaching for further gains for that cryptocurrency. A big earnings story coming out in the entertainment space, of course, when it comes to streaming, to the parks, the studios. It's Disney. That is pre-market later today. You're expected to see some decent numbers. Those are the analyst views. Studios expected to see some decent gains. Parks could be a disappointment, but they've kind of flagged that anyway. That's part of the mix. Streaming, you could get a second straight quarter of profitability for streaming. There's also, and always, of course, a question mark about CEO succession planning. Bob Iger has come back, of course, at the head of Disney. So those earnings will be important in terms of gauge as well on the health of that US consumer, but also those in China as well, with the Shanghai Park in focus. This is worth noting now. The HS Tech Index, of course, an index in Hong Kong, home to many of those big Chinese tech firms, actually off 20% since the highs of October. Part of that is down to strong dollar. Part of that, again, is down to concerns about what an incoming Trump administration will do in terms of further restrictions. And part of it is down to a lack of enthusiasm around the stimulus that has come through, the relatively piecemeal nature of it out of Chinese authorities. Coming up later today, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon joins Bloomberg's Lisa Abramovich for a fireside chat at the Apex CEO Summit in Lima, Peru. But up next, it's the opening trade. This is Bloomberg.